11,600 years ago, on a sun-scorched hilltop in southeastern Turkey, someone picked up a stone tool and carved a fox. Not once, everywhere. On the most significant pillars at Gobekli Tepe, on the central figures that bear human arms and hands, beneath the elbows of limestone giants that still have no agreed explanation, the fox appears, again and again, with a consistency that rules out coincidence and demands a question. Of all the animals these people knew, vultures, scorpions, wild boar, snakes, why does the fox occupy the most deliberate, most symbolically loaded positions at the oldest monumental site on Earth? The obvious answers involve symbolism, clan markers, spiritual totems, sacred emblems. But when researchers began examining fox remains from sites across the ancient Near East, and when isotope analysis and ancient DNA entered the picture, the answer that emerged wasn't mythology. It was biology. To understand why the fox demands attention, you have to walk the site, at least in your imagination. Enclosure B is where the dominance becomes impossible to ignore. On the large central T-shaped pillars on either side of the portal stone, the fox is everywhere, not scattered casually among other animals, present, repeated, foregrounded. Move to enclosure D and the placement becomes stranger still. The central pillar there is clearly anthropomorphic. It has arms, rendered in relief, bent at the elbow, hands meeting at the navel. It is, unmistakably, meant to represent something human. And right beside the bend of that arm, carved with the same deliberate hand, is a fox. A fox pelt hangs down from the figure as a loincloth. The fox is not decorating this pillar, it is part of it, woven into the anatomy of the most human figure at the site. Elsewhere, on pillars 1, 2, and 20, foxes appear alongside aurochs, cranes, and snakes. In some carvings, a fox appears beside another fox. The frequency alone would suggest significance, but it is the placement, beside the arms, beneath the hands, worn as skin, that turns frequency into something that requires a real explanation. Several explanations have been proposed, and none of them are unreasonable. The most intuitive is the clan theory. Different groups gathered at Gobekli Tepe, possibly from considerable distances, and each brought their own identity with them. Each enclosure on this reading belonged to a specific group defined by an animal emblem. Enclosure B was the Fox clan. Enclosure C, the boar. The dominant animal carving in each space marked whose ground it was. It is a tidy explanation, and it fits what we see reasonably well. A second theory ties the animal motifs to the seasons. The carvings, under this interpretation, are not emblems, but calendars, a visual record of nature's cycles encoded in stone, each animal marking a particular time of year. Then there are the spiritual explanations, which come in several varieties. Protective talismans, embodied gods, natural forces given animal form, stories carved in limestone for reasons we no longer have the context to read. And then there is the simplest explanation of all. Decoration. These were skilled artists working in a rich visual tradition, and perhaps some of what they carved meant nothing more than it appears to mean. Every one of these theories treats the fox as a symbol. The bones suggest something considerably more complicated. The refuse deposits at Gobekli Tepe contain a remarkable quantity of fox remains, more in fact than wild boar. Cut marks on some of the bones confirm they were occasionally eaten. Pelts were harvested. Teeth were used for ornamentation. On the surface, this looks like straightforward resource use. Practical, unsentimental, unremarkable. Then you look at what was happening at other sites across the region, and the picture shifts entirely. At a Natufian site in Jordan, dated to around 13,000 years ago, excavators uncovered something that stops you cold when you hear it properly. A human burial. Beside the human, a fox. Both sets of remains had been treated with red ochre, the same ritual pigment reserved at site after site across this era for the human dead. No other animal at the site received this treatment. Not one. The bones were later moved and reburied. The human and the fox were kept together throughout. That is not how you treat a food source. That is not how you treat a pest. You do not carry a fox's bones across a reburial, carefully, deliberately, alongside your own dead, unless that animal meant something personal. This burial predates domesticated dogs in the region entirely. The fox was there first. Ritual burial is compelling. But sentiment alone does not close the case. For that, you need biology. In 2019, researchers studying ancient burials in northeastern Spain made an unexpected discovery. At sites dating to the 3rd millennium BC and 2nd millennium BC, people had been buried alongside both dogs and foxes. Isotope analysis of the collagen preserved in their bones revealed something that nobody had quite anticipated. The dogs showed dietary patterns consistent with working animals. Expected, unremarkable. But one fox specimen told a different story entirely. This animal, old at the time of its death, had sustained a broken leg. The fracture showed clear signs of healing, and the nature of that healing indicated human intervention. Someone had tended to this fox, deliberately and repeatedly, over a sustained period. Its diet matched that of canine puppies found at the same site. It had been fed, cared for, and kept alive well into old age. A healed broken leg is not a minor detail. It represents a decision made repeatedly over weeks to invest in an animal that offered nothing immediate in return. That is care. Sustained, deliberate, personal care. And a study from 2020 of fox remains from European settlements dating back 15,000 years found dietary differences between wild foxes and those living near humans, suggesting the relationship had been quietly developing for a very long time. Which raises a question worth sitting with. Was any of this actually possible? Could the fox, biologically, be domesticated at all? In the 1960s, Siberia, a scientist named Dmitry Belyaev decided to find out. His interest was in understanding how dogs first came to live alongside humans, and he chose foxes for the experiment precisely because of their close genetic relationship to dogs. Working with fur farms across the Soviet Union, his team selected the tamest individuals available and began a controlled breeding program. The results were methodical and, eventually, extraordinary. By the 10th generation, 18% of cubs were classified as elite, animals that showed no fear of humans and actively sought out human contact. By the 20th generation, that figure had risen to 35%. Today, 70 to 80% of the population carries that disposition. They approach, they solicit attention, they behave, in all the ways that matter, like companions. What Belyaev's experiment revealed was not that he had created something new, he had uncovered something latent. The capacity for domestication was already written into fox biology, waiting for the right conditions to surface. Those conditions, it turns out, require nothing more than sustained human presence and consistent, deliberate choice, both of which Gobekli Tepe had in abundance. Pull all of this together, and a picture emerges that no single piece of evidence could have produced alone. The fox remains at Gobekli Tepe tell a layered story. Some were eaten, some were skinned for pelts. Teeth were worn as ornaments. These are the signs of practical use, of people extracting value from an animal they knew well. But practical use and close companionship are not mutually exclusive. They rarely have been across any human culture at any point in history. Consider what the fox actually offered a settlement community. It hunted rats and mice. It killed snakes, which are depicted on the very same pillars where the fox appears, carved side by side as if the relationship between them was already understood. It was adaptable, opportunistic, and capable, under the right conditions, of genuine attachment to the humans it lived among. the ritual burial in the Levant, the isotope data from Iberian Spain, the dietary evidence from European settlements 15,000 years ago, Belyaev's foxes in Siberia. None of these individually proves domestication at Göbekli Tepe. Together, they make it something more than speculation. They make it a serious possibility that in this corner of the ancient world, before dogs, the fox was the animal that chose to live beside us. Gobekli Tepe is usually discussed in terms of its stones. Their scale, their age, the sheer audacity of raising them without metal or wheels or any of the scaffolding we associate with monumental ambition. That is the story that rewrote the textbooks. But the fox carvings ask a quieter question. Not about what these people could build, but about how they actually lived, what animals shared their fires, what creatures they carried with them into death. The image of a fox pelt hanging as a loincloth on a towering limestone figure, carved with patient and practiced hands 11,600 years ago, is not just iconography. It may be a portrait of a relationship, one that was useful and familiar and possibly tender in ways the stone was never meant to fully explain. We came to Gobekli Tepe looking for monuments and mysteries. The fox suggests we should also be looking for something far closer to home.